Hey, so how's it going? Chapter 6, Obtaining Information and Intelligence. I'm going to sort of slip down a little bit. We're going to be going through some sources of information, interviewing and interrogation, talk about some techniques, some scientific aids, talking about how to question and when to question children and juveniles, evaluating corroborating information, sharing information, etc. And my favorite, the use of psychics and profilers. So we're going to get started here and video. So introduction, knowledge obtained through questioning and physical evidence is equally important. Questioning can provide leads for finding physical evidence. Confession must be supported by physical evidence or other. I think like the idea behind this is like they're just wanting you to know like there has to be a method behind the madness of what you're doing. So the idea is that listen, even though you get a confession, it has to be supported by physical evidence or other corroboration. If I just walked in right now and said, "Hey, you know what? I killed John F. Kennedy," um, no, that's not something I could be prosecuted on because obviously I wasn't born at that time. But at any rate, it's those type of things is that we have to be able to have corroborating evidence and testimony as well too. And that's done by right up here. Is that through your questioning and physical evidence is that's how it is all brought together. You'll see how that's going to work in your assignment for later tonight. So sources of information. As it talks about here, the overview. Three primary sources of information are available: reports, records, databases, people who are not suspects in a crime but who know something about the crime, and suspects in the crime. So you're going to see on the next slide as well too, but this is actually a sample of a person and what is called the RMS, which is the Record Management System. And you can see in here just a little bit of information. I apologize about the sort of the illegibility about this, but they have the guy's name in here. The information, date of birth, Hispanic, blah blah. The stuff of interest to you is that his place of birth was Seattle, and they got his driver's license number because he was born in Seattle. Now he lives in California, so now he's got ties in two states. And 109, I'm not sure if that's tied into Washington or not, but wherever he may have got his Social Security number, usually those first three digits are the designator of where it was taken in at. Says that he's a cook and says he's affiliated with a gang, the Trey Crips maybe or something of that nature. I can't read exactly what it says. Talks about his arms and tattoos and so forth on there. So that's just one piece of information, but I can tell you that our databases that we get for our current investigations with sexual crimes, man, we attack this type of stuff because what you're going to find out in there, and what you'll find out in my next slide as well too, is that there's a lot to be taken in from databases, RMS systems that the state of Michigan now, several so the Michigan State Police has a record management system that they would like everyone to start dumping into. And so that way, if I'm in Iron Mountain, Michigan, or in Detroit, Michigan, I could be able to pull up information on anyone at any time and information share like that. So that is a big plus of what's coming around the corner for you folks in Michigan. You're going to be fighting crime in Michigan. So one other piece of information I'll offer up here, man, is that they don't talk about in the book is Child Protective Services, and that if you have an event that took place, uh, you can get a person's literally life history if they've been in the actual system. and then you can also get that information of who their brothers and sisters are and so forth. And we're not going to attack it right now, but it says to do with familial DNA is something that I'm familiar with, where we actually don't have the suspect's DNA, but we might have a brother of the suspect. So we can talk about that in the next couple of chapters. So suspects in the crime, obviously they can be a source of the information as well too, because sometimes people are not just doing crime together, but they can also be helpful in other crimes. And what I say about this is we actually just had this information yesterday, where we were talking about somebody that had a drug conviction. So essentially, when we work narcotics, if you somebody gets arrested for like possession of meth or something of that nature, it usually gets handed over to you the next morning to go and talk to that person, where you go to the jail, excuse me, and interview that person and try to get some input from him on where he got his narcotics from, and essentially what the drug trade looks like for him and who he knows that sells, and that's a way of gaining intelligence. So, man, what the heck is this thing over here? So let's not talk about this just yet. Let's talk about other sources of information. Continuing reports, records, and databases, local resources, auto track systems. Um, Recently, there was a homicide in Kalamazoo County. This auto track system, and that was something that there was a GPS located in the car because they had OnStar, and guess what? They took the people right where their car was stolen, right to where they were murdered at. And so this is really good information as far as even inside their cars. And not too many people know about that, but you do now. So we are now talking about like caller ID systems, um, pen registers. If you're not familiar with what pen registers is, tune into The Wire sometime. I think it's one of the most amazing crime documentaries, not documentary, but dramas that has been on TV. I just love The Wire. But basically, what that is that you're recording phone numbers that are coming in, and then dial number recorders. Those are the ones that are going out. State and federal resources. We can, I've actually teamed up with the Army before on some of these cases that I've worked for, and I'm actually working a case right now that involves somebody that's in the Marine Corps. So tracking that information down, there's a lot of holding of the hands as we continue on for the mission. So the internet, extremely valuable source of information. I just offer this up. There's so much to be found on the internet. It's freaking ridiculous to even just talk about something called social media, right? So what you're going to see here is how this is actually my worksheet that I use at the work in the sex crimes. So I'm just going to sort of dilly over here a little bit. And so the investigation checklist, like every one of these things has to be done on the suspect and victim as well too. So when we look for a suspect, we are going to review all reports related to my incident. SAKI stands for Sexual Assault Kit Initiative. So we get the original reports, we get the sexual assault exam, we get the lab report from the people who do the DNA testing. We do the Michigan State lab reports in case there's any other. We get medical records, like if they're involved in spouse assault or broken bones or anything of that nature. And then once we get all that down, we go to if there's no DNA, we look at them. That has nothing really to do with you, so I apologize that I brought that up. But you obtain the original investigation. We get the original photos. We get the recorded interviews from 10, 12 years ago. We get any written statements. We run the law enforcement network, and some of you guys were talking like in the police report stuff about running a record or running a license plate. That's what all that means. CCH, criminal history. Secretary of State for suspects. So I don't know if you know this or not, but like we could take, if you took my name, you could get all vehicles registered to and also a history of all vehicles records to. So if I ever was, I don't know, like named up in a rape from, I don't know, let's say 15, since when I was 16 years old, they essentially could still look and try to see if that car existed and who owned it. It was a 78 Omega, so I doubt that it's still around. But the point being is that they could still try to locate that car, find who has it, and then also um, use it for photos or if you had to do a vehicle photo lineup, stuff of that nature. But they could test it for DNA if it was still around. So again, there's a lot that can be done through the Secretary of State. Search the suspect in databases. So TLO is, if you're not familiar with it, it's like LexisNexis, and basically that is a service that you can actually buy as well too. But essentially, what that is that you can learn anything and everything and anything about a person, where they've been arrested, who they shared houses with, who their consumer powers bills, cable bills, utilities, anything of that nature. You can tell if they lived at 123 Main Street. You can talk about who lived in that house. You can ask who lived in that house beforehand and who lived in there afterwards. It is ridiculous the amount of information that can come from that, and we get charged a fee for it. But law enforcement, we just pay a yearly fee to get into that. Odyssey, that has to do with an in-house system that has to do with juvenile records. ACT means adult criminal tracking. So that is in-house for prosecutorial records. So like I can get whatever I want to from cases when they were adults or when they were juveniles. iLeads, that is the record management system for KDPS, Kade Township, Kade County. They all subscribe to that. So that was going around since 2004, 2005. So you got 16 years of records in there. And I think we already did an OTIS check earlier, or maybe that was in the intro to corrections. But some of you should know what that is. Offender Tracking Information System, I believe, but it's in Michigan. Search suspect on social media. I had this maybe sounds stupid, but just to get information on somebody, like I ended up finding out that one particular person that I was looking at was running for treasurer over in a county that's just south of Wayne County. And so I want to be able to get any and all information on him and watch the news on that person and any other information I could get on them because they have to do certain disclosure statements when they're doing running for an election, right? We already talked about Facebook, but Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Do I have to talk about that? Nah. But if you're going to be stalking somebody, you're already understanding how it is that we use that, from check-ins to likes to um, favorited pages. Is endless the amount of information we can get from that. Obtain any PPOs filed against suspect in any jurisdiction. So there's personal protection orders. So again, we're talking about this is so if somebody was creating violence against you and you felt uneasy, you could get a personal protection order on that person. And the event on why it was that it was filed would still be on there. The event on even if it was denied by a judge will still be reported on there. So it'll give you some information. I could run Jim Thornton, the name, and I could find out if he's ever had any PPOs, or I might be able to have other witnesses that have made that I didn't know about at the time that could pop up on Jim Thornton, so that would bring me to other possible witnesses. Yeah, so this actually right number 10 right here. This is a really good one. This is not something that we did when I worked for Kalamazoo City, but this is something we do here. Like we actually go back and like investigate the suspect before we make contact with them. So we contact all of those reports listed on there within Kalamazoo County. And then also, when we go and do our backgrounds for, where is it, right up here, like the TLO, remember I said it was LexisNexis. Well, I had a guy that is a teacher and was a teacher over in Wayne County, Oakland County at one time. And so I pulled up his contacted Oakland County Sheriff's Department, all the other metro departments that are in that area, and I asked them to search for this guy, and I found out when he was 15 years old, he ended up was his high school girlfriend's friend accused him of rape as well too. So those things all pop up just by what we call as digging, right? So that's what I'm trying to push into some of you folks here. These other acts down here, I mean, that really doesn't have a whole lot of information to you other than, like I say, when we start digging into other areas of where this person might end up now. Like, again, I know that he's was in New York for a little bit, so I contacted all the departments back there, 6 or 7 of them out on Staten Island, New York, and which is east of New York City. Couldn't find anything on them, but I spent about a half a day calling and talking to departments out there. But you never know when you do come up to something. So, next slide, 10 minutes. Sources of information, victims, complaints, and witnesses, neighborhood canvas, knock and talk, and a caution. So a neighborhood canvas, man, I'll tell you what, you are going to get information from doing what's a neighborhood canvas. And if you don't know what a neighborhood canvas is, it's literally that you are just going and knocking on doors near where the event took place and trying to find people to talk to you, right? And so I'm just going to just offer this up to you is that, again, if you're in an area where the police and the citizens don't mix real well, it could be tough for you to get that information. So what I'm going to offer up to you, what I have found, is just to write on a piece of where people don't answer the door. I think this will be covered in another slide as well too. But so I won't talk about it now. But the neighborhood canvas, you can find that on page 194, and the idea is that when you're doing a canvas is to identify one person to serve as sort of the canvas supervisor. So if you have an event that takes place, you're going to sort of say, hey, I need you and you to go take the west side of the street, you and you to take the east side of the street, and work north and south or east and west. So you're going to have like some geographical boundaries for the canvas, as I just indicated. You're going to want to make sure that you have clear instructions. So like when you go to do your canvas, you just can't say, yeah, do you live here? No, I'm not. I don't live here. Okay, well, can I talk to somebody who lives here? Yeah, they're not here right now. Well, were you here in the last half hour? Did you hear gunshots? Did you hear a car squeal away? Yes, that could have been who that person was there for. You won't gain that information unless you do the neighborhood canvas. I'm going to go to another slide when I talk about like interviewing people separately and stuff of that nature, because I threw a photo up there for that. But you do want to interview people separately. One of the parts on page 194 that I think is extremely important, but it's an ask for the names of everyone who lives at, works at, visits, delivers to, or has access to the location of where you're canvassing. Because really when you're dealing with those type of crimes, whether it be home invasion or it might be rape or murder, shooting, you don't know who actually seen it. And so, we've had stuff that people are live on Facebook and posting stuff. So, you really want to be able to get as much information as you can from them. But you got to be able to have a rapport, and that rapport building is extremely important. So anyway, so I just sort of throw that out there on that. So what the H is in knock and talk, right? So, and it's an investigative technique according to here that talks about, um, let's put it this way. I'm going to give you an example. So you have a house where drugs are being sold or there's potential violence or guns there and so forth. So in my old days, we used to send informants inside there and attempt to buy narcotics, or yours truly would be in disguise, not in disguise, but my long hippie hair and big old beard, and would go buy drugs inside the house. And but now what they're doing is more standard practice because that's very time consuming. Is they just go and knock on the door and ask for consent to search the house. And in most parts, they actually do. People actually let people come in to search their house on a consensual manner, and it is totally legal to do that. But you're seeing more stuff like on TikTok and social media that says if the police comes and knocks on your door, they don't let them in. Um, so so people are becoming more educated in that fashion. There's things we can do, and we can talk about that maybe in another chapter, um, which we did talk about in an earlier chapter of being if we might see something in plain view, how we can uh, make entry to hold it for a search warrant, stuff of that nature. If we felt like the evidence was going to be what destroyed, right? So a caution. This is sort of interesting about a caution. I've never even heard this before. So, like with a caution, they're basically just talking about take it cautiously. I don't know why they called it a caution, but just understanding that suspect and witnesses' statements are not always reliable, and so you take everything essentially with a grain of salt. And when people are and we're going to talk about this in another slide, but when people are in trauma related and stress related events, they don't always see what it is that they see, and their brain will fill in some content. So, yeah, I mean, that's something that, again, as we say, you have the truth, and from what two sides say to the other, and the truth actually falls somewhere in between the two stories. So, anyway, so I guess it means a caution, like take caution. Yeah, so informants, I just offer this up to you with informants. I mean, you're going to cover, you know, in 2 minutes here, I'm going to cover, 30 years of dealing with informants. And so I guess I'll put it this way. So, like a CI or confidential informant, as the book said, it's a person who is formally registered with and compensated by the department for supplying information or performing a or performing a service such as a controlled purchase of drugs. I had all kinds of informants, and bringing informants to come do your work. That's what you got to really remember is that they're there to do work for you. You're not there to be their buddy. They're not there to be your buddy. So it's very professional relationship that you do have. And these people, most of them are in the business that you're trying to investigate. So whether it's drugs or kitty porn or whatever it may be, um, they're not one of the good people. All right. I mean, they are in it, and they may have the right um, why it is that they're doing it, and that's really to get the central on why it is that they're in it. They may be in it to make money, to get their own drug habit, or to feed their own drug habit. They may be doing it for vengeance. They may be doing it for what would be another reason? I mean, really, money and vengeance is the big one, or the trying to clean up the streets. I've had some that work for me that were clean now, and then wanted to go back and do all their dealers that were feeding them drugs over the years. So, I mean, that type of stuff. Each one of those things, though, could lead to them planning drugs to go in and do an informant buy and stuff of that nature. So you really have to be careful. You got to do strip searches before and after. When I mean strip searches, I mean strip searches, like nothing on their person. And I'm going to just say this so you know, but you do have them spread their butt cheeks, and you do, if they're male, of course, a male would be viewing this. They'd have to lift up their genitals, and that would go for a female as well too. You'd have to have a female officer do all that before they go in, and when they come out, to make sure that they didn't plan anything or they didn't bring some out for themselves. I want you to know, I probably have had 15 to 20, I'm just going to say this, 15 to 20 informants. Out of those 15 and 20, I've had 2 or 3 that were bringing drugs out or planting drugs in. But they were caught and then they were never used again. I've had some informants that have worked for me probably since 93, and off and on they would work for me whenever I needed them to. And I've had them, even today, I still have one of their cell phone numbers, and so that would be about 28, 29 years, 28 years in. They don't work for me all the time, but when I need to know when something's going on, or if I'm looking for somebody who's extremely down low, I've helped this person out on some things over the years with their own criminal charges, and they've also turned me on to some very large stuff, from homicides to kilos, and I'm talking about kilos of heroin, not kilos of cocaine. So big stuff. Um, anyways, but I think the biggest one thing I can offer up to you is that when you're cultivating informants, is to treat them like people. And when I say that, again, I said it's got to be professional. And I really have to tell you is that you got to treat them like people, and they'll, in respect, treat you like a person as well too, even though you may be on the other side for them. So a couple things that here says establishing reliability. This is from the book on page 195. You want to corroborate as much of the informant's information as possible. Determine how, when, or where, under what circumstances the informant obtained the information. Explain without citing specific cases, names, use the informant's information in past cases that led to arrest, conviction, seizures. Provide or reveal statements informants made. Identify the informant if it is safe to do. Absolutely not. That doesn't happen. We don't identify the informants. I don't know what kind of screwball wrote that in there. But the one thing is that you got to say that your informant is proven and reliable, and that may be that the person has done 8 buys for me, and he was strip searched before and after he went in to purchase drugs or to gain information or whatever it may be, or they wore a wire. So one thing I do want to put on here, again, this says snitch contracts, and I put, this is my slide that I put on there, and I specifically put that on there for this, is that snitch informants, I never would refer to them as snitches, I refer to them as informants, and they are contracted. So I mean, there's liability out there that if you're like sending them into an area that is like could be hazardous to their house, or like they could end up being hurt and they get shot, or they're working for you and they get shot because of something that you've done. They've came back and sued the department for lost wages. They've served different departments for um, uh, being shot, um, uh, having their identity out there. So you really got to be careful with all that, and that's why things are going more towards knock and talks, because they just don't want to even deal with this because of the liability issue. Um, so suspects, here's another one, directly or indirectly connected with a crime. Field interviews. The first part is self-explanatory, but field in interviews, I mean, for that one, that essentially is that you are in a specific area, and you may not actually like know. Like they may not be directly involved with the crime, they may be indirectly, like they might be uh, somebody that drove the car or somebody that actually got the car for the person to drive in a homicide or a drive-by shooting or an abduction or whatever it may be. Somebody, we had a girl that would buy 30, 40 phones at a time from a specific gas station. As soon as they came in, she'd come and buy them because everybody was doing burner phones. If you don't know what a burner phone is, but that's basically a trackless phone that can't have any tracking on it, and they basically buy them for 25, 30 bucks, and then they throw them away when they're done after doing a criminal event, like a bank robbery or something of that nature. So there's that one. Oh man. So I just had to redo the last three slides over. I actually right clicked. So here I go again. I'll cut down to the chase because I was running my mouth on a couple of them. So interviewing and interrogating, my first slide of the three here. So all right, you can go ahead and read the stuff in the blue, but truthfully, pay homage to the stuff that's in the red. That's my stuff there. And the idea is that I want you to understand is like it says the interview, not all suspects, but know something of value. I get that. All right, so they're talking about a difference between interview. I'm talking about interviewing and interrogating suspects. And an interrogation is suspected of direct or indirect involvement. That's their definition. I'm telling you the difference between what an interview and an interrogation is for somebody who's been in the field. Number one is the person in custody. And are they free to leave? And if so, you have to read them their Miranda rights. And that they have to be able to waive it, and it has to be an intelligent waiver, and it has to be voluntary. So if you didn't hear me on that, go back and play it again, because literally that should be the only difference in the way that you're treating people in the interview or interrogation room or while you're out on the street. I mean, you should literally be in that same tone when you're doing that. And I'm going to tell you that's a path to success right now for you when you get in that area is to treat people the same, whether you're interviewing or interrogating them. And then the only difference in it has to do with interrogation is are they in custody, which means are they free to leave? And if so, you have to read them their Miranda rights, and they have to have a voluntary and intelligent waiver. Next. So interviewing and interrogating, characteristics of an effective interviewer and interrogator. The black is what they wrote down. I'm going to definitely agree what they talked about with the adaptable and culturally adroit. There's 100%, as the book says here, is that listen, they got to be in all forms of. You got to be able to understand people from all walks of life. In 1 minute, you may be talking to somebody from I don't know, from a very culturally diverse area to the next person, you might be talking to somebody in a tuxedo. And so the point being is that like you got to be able to, as I say, you got to be listening to rap music, you got to be listening to classical music, you got to be listening to pop music, you got to be listening to YouTube generate whatever it may be. You got to be able to have all of that in the back of your head and swimming through your head because you may have to pull from it because you don't know nothing about that person until you get in the room or until you get out on the street with them. You have to adapt to them immediately. Why in the heck that officer? I'm sure he's a nice guy, but why in the heck does he have his taser out right now? I have no idea. Not a good idea at all, and I'm glad that he doesn't work in my town. Not a good idea. But for me, the most important thing is to be inquisitive. And so ask why. You know, tell that certain question that that I like to ask is tell me more about that. And so that way, like even when you were like writing out your police reports, your practice police reports, I mean that literally is what you're supposed to be asking yourself while you're writing a police report. What else could I say more? That's the same thing you should be doing when you're interviewing an interrogation room. What more can I ask them? Tell me more about feeling sick. Tell me more about the pain you felt when the bullet entered. Tell me more about the blue Impala. Okay, so I feel like hopefully you're hearing me on that. Enhancing communications, emotional, other barriers. I get that. Be sensitive to the individual's rights. Um, One of the things that they didn't write in here is to be self-controlled and patient. That's on page 196. I felt that was a pretty good point what they wrote there. Is that you got to really be patient when you're talking to folks that are out there because it's on their time. It's not on your time. We understand you may have other calls to go take, you have other cases to take, but truthfully, it's on their time. And that doesn't really matter if you're an interview or an interrogator. I mean, you can take your time. It's one case at a time. And so I'll offer this up as like, and I think I mentioned this before. I mean, I've interviewed somebody for 19 hours. Okay, and I'm not bluffing. I interviewed for somebody for 19 hours. The toughest interview that I've ever had to do. You may think it'd be that one. It wasn't. It was a lady that was working at a Salvation Army that faked a robbery that stole $105 out of the like the money box, not like from the cash register, but like a donation box. I could not get this lady to crack, and I know it was her that did it. And ultimately, she did end up fessing up. But I thought this was going to be a real easy one, that she was going to be a pushover, and it was very frustrating to me because I felt like she should have told earlier than what she did, but she didn't. But because of the different areas that I work, I really was out of touch with speaking to somebody who was going to church all the time, who was a part of their church as part of the like an active part of the congregation. And for me, it was hard to try to understand and try to get to um, why she would be faking this. And literally, the reason why she was faking it was because she wanted to buy her daughter something that was not at Salvation Army, and so she decided to steal the money there, the donation money, so that she could go to a nice store in the mall and buy her something, which was sort of interesting because she said that the daughter didn't even like the sweater after she did all that for her. So that was the breaking point for her during the interview. But long and short of it is that I went in feeling overconfident and not really knowing who it was I was talking to. I was not adapting culturally adroit to her, and I should have. I shouldn't have took it lightly. Man, interviewing and interrogating the last one. So I picked this up. This is not one of their slides by any means, but if you can have active listening skills, I'm not going to go through each one of these pictures here, but this literally is how it goes down and how you can get what I term anyone to talk to you. Anyone to talk to you. So building trust and rapport, just demonstrating concerns, writing down there about use brief verbal affirmations to say, hey, I understand what you're talking, and then reverting it back to them, and then ask specific questions. And that essentially shows that you're caring. Now, I don't care if this person raped a 3-year-old, because I've been in those interviews before, but yeah, your idea is to understand why it is that they did it. And if you're not using that, you literally just want to go in there and beat the poop out of this guy, which you will want to, but your job is to get the confession out of this person. And so you have to do these active listening skills, and you have to play the part until it's done. So, and the thing is that if this person's doing this type of stuff, who else did they do this to? And so you want to keep the door open for them to give you more information about other things that they may have done or other information that they have crimes on. So, I wrote that, and this is their stuff. Two basic requirements: listen, observe. Obviously, that can all be taken in with active listening skills. But the type of questions: direct, indirect, closed-ended, open-ended, and leading. I think I'm just gonna focus on open-ended. And what used to happen in direct questioning is that, like, if you're direct questioning somebody, you're actually trying to pin them in a corner, and that's what they're gonna feel like. And there's a time and place for that, but in reality, it doesn't happen too often at all. It's more towards the end of the interview, like once all your cards have been played. Indirect questioning, that may be something about where you're going to talk about them being in and around the scene. So they weren't there, but is it possible that this could happen? Um, Closed-ended questions. Those are literally just asking them yes or no questions or yes or no answer questions. So you don't want them to actually give you more information. You just want them to say that yes or no. So I'm going to give you a quick example with that. Is that just last week, me and my partner were interviewing this guy through DOC, Department of Corrections, and he says hey man, I don't know this person. I don't know this girl that's saying that's raping. So the idea is that hey, if they're saying you don't know that person that raped you, well then why is your DNA inside of her? I've never seen that person before. I don't know. Well then why is your DNA inside that person? So you want them to say no, right? That they don't know her. So you don't ask them open-ended questions. An open-ended question, though, allows the person to speak and then answer. And I offer this up as well too, is that if most of you have parents that are still around, your parents will ask you questions that are yes or no answer questions, and then they get pissed off at you on why it is you don't talk to them. So the idea is that to ask open-ended questions. Don't be a parent, and I'm sure most of you know what I'm talking about. It's very direct and to the point, and yeah, so that's something that there's a time and place for that, but stay open-ended. That's how you're gonna open the gates and build trust and establish rapport. Leading questions. Yeah, you know what? You can use leading questions at times. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of that, especially when you're working with people from kids. You really have to stay away from that because, again, it's sort of feeding a kid a piece of candy. So you really want to make sure that when you talk to them, that you're not leading them to a certain specific area. In the book, it talks about here leading prompts or a leading question prompts or leads a person to a specific response and often implies an answer. So, page 198, and their example was, how much did you drink before you went next door and assaulted your neighbor? And it implies that the suspect had been drinking before the assault. Uh, I think we can sort of maybe stay with that and understand that. But an open-ended question might be, um, tell me about your drinking habits. A closed-ended question is, um, did you drink last night? And then we get to sort of the direct questions as well too, and that is again we're talking about um, uh, what time did you start drinking last night? The other one may be for indirect. It might be something of, you know, tell me, as I said a little bit. So indirect and open-ended are close to the same, but the concept would be is when you're using indirect to, it says to use disguised here, but it might be is hey, what's your favorite beer to drink? So if we know that there was like old Milwaukee cans over at your neighbor's, well, that would mean the possibility that that's why the person was over there. Recording and videotaping interviews and interrogations. Um, we are obviously at a time in law enforcement that if it ain't on video or it ain't recorded, it didn't happen. And that's because of the abuse that officers have done over the years on testimony, and it's just not a good area. But I will say this, as I said before, I'm a fan of body cameras. I'm a fan of recording and video interviews, interrogations. I don't do anything wrong on there, so I literally want the jury to actually see what it is that we're doing. So by all means, you should, without a doubt, make sure that you're recording and videotaping your interviews and interrogations, because later what it can do is it can save you in court. Well, my person's saying, listen, I never said that. Well, guess what? You did say it. It is on video and it is on audio. Yeah, so I'm just going to sort of jump into this. Um, Change up my color scheme on this slide. Hope you enjoy it. The established priority of obtaining statements. So essentially, when you show up at a scene and like you may be talking to this woman right here, which I'm going to offer up, maybe looks like she's pointing to the back of her neck. She looks in a little bit of a distress. Maybe she took a karate chop to the back of the head from her partner. So you're going to want to sort of establish who it is and what it is that you're going to want to talk to when an event takes place. And so some of those main sources of information, obviously, is the complainant, which is not always the victim. So in this event right here, the police may have been called because the neighbor had seen something take place, and so they may actually be the complainant. So then you also have the victim and witnesses as well too. Um, it's already here, but it specifically says is that under the picture for this one, some interviews are conducted under difficult circumstances. Excuse me, when victims or witnesses have suffered trauma or under duress, obtaining statements from domestic violences victims can be challenging. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit, and we did talk about that a little bit before about asking open-ended questions, and we're going to talk in another slide. I'm going to have a picture of the brain as we get down the line, and how and why how things are recorded when trauma takes place, and that is a very important slide. Anyways, if you're going to pull one thing from this slide, you need to be a fact finder. Don't write just the positive stuff down, write the negative stuff down. If the two of them were fighting beforehand and she said, you know what, you have been cheating on me, and threw a plate at him, and then he turned around and cuffed her in the back of the head, you write all that stuff down. You can't like alleviate information from the report. Excuse me. Advanced planning. Now, I'm not really sure what their point is on this specific idea, but I mean, when you're out into the field, when you're doing field interviews, this is going to be something different that's going to happen back at the station house or the headquarters or wherever it may be. So you're going to like review reports about the case, as we talked about earlier when you watched my Saki report on how it is that we get that information, and then we're going to anticipate how the people respond. And sometimes that's just the idea of like looking at old interviews and saying, hey, you know what, this guy was a jackwad to us, and he doesn't like the police, or he doesn't like Officer Callahan, so we got to make sure that Officer Callahan or his brother isn't coming in here to interview this person. It could be something as simple as that. Selecting the time and place, ensure the scene is safe, and determine the complainant witnesses recall details best immediately. So I sort of chuckle a little bit about that. But we'll talk about the scene stuff first. Obviously make sure that the scene is safe and determine the complaint. Again, that can't always be done. If I haven't discussed it before, I got New Year's Eve night probably in 2009, 2010, I think is when it was. Let me think about this. 2010. We had, I think it was 8 or 9 people get shot at the Sprinkle Road Holiday Inn at the time. And nobody knows who essentially called it in for the complaint, but there were several people that were the victim. And I think they actually called it in on a burner phone. And then we didn't get other calls after that, so they only sent a little bit of a few people out there, but then they got more calls coming in. But these were all witnesses; they weren't literally the complainants of the actual event. So the thing about witnesses recall details best immediately. I don't agree with that. I think like you can get some initial information from them, but really especially in trauma-related events, it's best to make some initial information from them and then go back and talk to them again, because they're going to remember things after you talk to them because of the way that the brain records stressful events. Um, this slide that I have right here, this photo right here, this is not how you want to interview people at all. I don't know if all these people are related or not, or whatever, or they're not related. But this officer is talking to probably this person right here, this female right here, and all the other potential witnesses are next to her, giving information where he may need to interview each one of those people later. So like, unless they're like a support person, like maybe I don't know if this is her mother or sister, but having that person close to them, or maybe a husband or spouse, domestic partner, whatever it be, we surely don't need four other people around this person to get the information. So separate your people so that you can get good, valid information. You don't get sharing of stories. So the interview, yeah, 3 of 6. Beginning the interview, friendly but professional. Show your credentials. Establish rapport, understanding, careful listening, enhance rapport. So remember I talked about like things aren't really different between like interviews and interrogations. Is like there's something that's on each one of these officers' face, like this officer's face and this officer's face. Can you tell what it is? It's called a freaking smile, right? So you are going to get more from this guy who's smiling back. You're going to get more from this lady if you're going to smile and you're going to listen intensely to them, and because they want to deal with somebody who's going to respect them. And as it says here, it enhances your rapport. But I mean, really, I mean that there's nothing really tough about it. It's when you come off as I don't understand what that means. It's showing. Well, I know what showing credentials means. That means if you're in plain clothes. But there's nothing about like flashing your badge and broadening your shoulders to let people know that you're a boss. That's a huge turn off with people, and it should be. And no officer should be acting like that. But I see it all the time. I see it all the time, especially towards victims, which there's really no place in it. There's a term that's called victim blaming, and we need to work on from a place from empathy rather than a place from being a nasty police officer and so forth, and blaming people. Anyways, okay, next up. So this is two different sections here. So networking an interview and reluctant interviewees. So this has to do with reluctant interviews. So let's just talk about networking an interview, which is on the page at top of page 201 if you're following along. Essentially, what this has to do with is you need to if you establish relationships with people that are in your neighborhoods, socially, eth- ethnically, culturally, business, professionally, occupational, religious, or politically, you're going to be able to have more of an idea on how to work with that person that helps establish the relationships. As I've said before, you need to be able to listen to all types of music. You need to be, especially as you start to get older, because you need to be able to understand different cultures outside of yours. It's easy to do that because that's what you know, and that's why some detectives and some police officers just feel uncomfortable being undercover. They Because they don't know how to speak to folks like that live a different lifestyle than them. Reluctant interviewees. You're seeing this all the time. This is actually in Florida. They have DUI stops down there. Random DUI stops. Those are actually illegal in Michigan. So this attorney started printing these things out, and you could put these on your window. So when they pull up to a DUI, it just says that you have to submit your driver's license. This is actually one of the scenarios that I run when I do traffic stops at the academy. That I just have the officer when he pulls the person over. I have my role player um, roll the window down and hand them the roll it down just a slit and hand them the insurance and driver's license and registration, or because the actual case law for that just says you must display. Because you have to give them. So literally, they just put it up to their windows, and that they don't want to talk to them. And I've had some cadets pull people out of the car. I've had some cadets walk away from it. So there's all kinds of things that can be done. I'm not going to tell you what the correct approach is, but really the correct approach is to write the ticket and go on throughout the day. The person just does not wish to speak with you. There's other things that, there may be things in the car. There may not be things in the car. But that's up to you to find the case law that fits to the situation that you're at hand. You can't take it personally when people want to voice their right to remain silent and they don't want to speak to you. They don't have to speak to you. So you can, like it says here, logical approach, emotional approach. Um, like emotional approaches, I'm not really bagging that. I've never seen that actually work at all. Um, the logical approach is, a place that says it's based on a reason, and you're basically just gonna sort of explain to the person on, like we need you to help and cooperate with investigators. People don't care about that crap. They really don't. The emotional approach has to do with feelings of hate, anger, greed, revenge, pride. I'm on the top of 202 if you want to um, see that. But, it says here, like anyone in your situation would respond the same way. Um, and it says, if such tactics do not work, warn the person of their serious consequences of withholding information. So I don't like that approach at all. I just sort of feel like if they don't want to say it, they don't have to say it, because literally that just escalates the situation, and you may need that person down the line. I think it's best to just say, hey, listen, I respect what you're saying, and if you change your mind, hey, here's my business card. Maybe I'll reach out to you in a week, 2 weeks, whatever it be. But I've had people say, listen, F you, don't call me back again. So I mean, you're not going to be able to use them in trial. So what's the sense of trying to put somebody in a verbal headlock to get you to tell information? So it's just not good practice of what the book is saying here. So here you go. There's the brain, right? So the cognitive interview, it tries to get the interviewer to recall, see mentally secluded, quiet place free of distractions, reconstruct the circumstances. So this is where I'm at right now. And so, man, I'm telling you what. So I'm going to offer this up to you. So you can go ahead and read through all this type of stuff here and do read it because it is well informed. So, all right, here you go. So this here's the brain. Again, this is the front here. So this is the front on this guy's person. Our everyday talking right now, excuse me, on what it is like we're doing and you conversating with me on a phone, that's all being recorded by what we just term as a little guy that works inside this area right here. And he's writing everything down on a piece of paper. As soon as trauma or an extremely stressful event takes place, this guy goes back into the corner and puts his nose in the corner because he's scared. And this is what happened is the chemical system within your brain tells the guy this is too much for you. So your reptilian complex, which is this part of your brain inside here, and your stem starts doing the recording of the event. Well, these guys don't write on pieces of paper and write out these long things. They essentially, this is the way that I term this, and this is for my victims, is like, you know, like when you're watching like a video on your phone and you like can screenshot some of it as it's going, so it's like while the video is rolling, and you get like these pictures that fall in between the videos. That's essentially what is happening when these guys start doing the recording, okay? And when a stressful event takes place, that's why that there's gaps between memories. And they actually start to recall on your five senses. You know, this is a little bit out here for you, but I'm telling you, this is the way that things happen within when stressful and traumatic events take place. So, like when we watched that video on Corporal Cooper and Ben Sherman on Southland, where there was a shooting that took place there. In those officers, they are all, no matter how much further trained, these guys are doing all of the recording of what took place. So that's why it's so important to have the body cameras on. And each person is clicking, right? Their screen, their video is clicking at different points. So that's why everything may not match up. So when they talk about, like, you know, witnesses seeing this and that, well, it's stressful for some witnesses. So if you're not aware of it, but every officer, when they get involved in a shooting, they have to give like some very initial information to sort of help the investigators out at that time. But what they end up doing is that they won't interview them until 2 to 3 days later about what actually happened. Because all of this right here, and your stress and your cortisol levels and all that type of stuff, it all goes and it makes this guy finally come out after a couple days, and then he can sort of help sort, he or she can sort of help sort this information here. And so think of it this way as well too, is that, like, let's say you have a deck of cards, and all of those are sheets of paper, okay? And all those sheets of paper, like index paper on the index cards, they're all written down, like on the stuff that takes place, written down by these guys right here. Well, now when you got drugs involved and drinking involved, it literally takes those cards and throws them up in the air, blown in the wind, and falls down on the ground. And some of them fall face down with the information, some of them fall face up with the information, and some of them fall right on the corners. And they're waiting for wind to blow them over so that they can be told on. So the idea, or recalled. So the idea is that when we start looking into the five senses, like if somebody, and I'm going to give you an example, is like one of my past rape cases is that this girl was raped in a bar bathroom. I'm sorry, was raped, yeah, in a bar bathroom. And so my questions to her was, what did you smell when you were inside there? Tell me about what you smelled. And she said, I could smell the smell of urine. And I would say to her, tell me about the smell of urine. And then she would describe the smell of urine. And because she was describing the smell of urine from that day, it triggered something else that she remembered on another event that took place inside of the bathroom that she couldn't remember before, but because it was written on one of those emotional cards, right, the census cards, she was able to recall it. Another thing that I say, tell me about what you heard when you were in the bathroom. I remember water running. Tell me about the water, remember. What do you remember about the water running? And then she says, like, it was a drip. Tell me about the drip. It would be like dripping. I could hear it dripping. While it was dripping, what was happening to you? And she would talk about what was happening to her. And obviously, I'm not going to repeat that. But that's how you get that information out from that. I'm telling you, it is the way to go for traumatic events to recall. So there's more about it. This is actually called the FETI interview method, forensic experiential trauma interview. I went to a school for that. Have used it. I used it all the time. But you got to have a quiet, secluded area to use this. You can't just use this on the fly. You should be trained in it. You could once you do get trained in it, it is exceptional to use for trauma-related victims. So, anyways, so there we go with that. The interview, 6 of 6. Statements, legal narrative, description of events related to a crime, who, what, where, and why. Formal detailed account, closing the interview, thank the person for coming. All right. So the point is that like with the interview, is that these are the questions that you're trying to get out of it. And so while the person is sort of telling your story, if these are not being answered, and they're not being answered in detail, right? You're going to see that on one of your assignments. In detail, you need to sort of ask some more questions on those. They might not ask about when, right? I don't even have that on there. Where, why, I didn't write when on there. So the point being is that like we might get all this information that this girl was raped at, um, at Western Michigan University. But the point is that when she was sexually assaulted, was never answered. So when I take this to court or I go to swear to a warrant, right, because we have to give a formal, detailed account of what took place, the judge is going to ask me, well, when did this take place? And I'm like, you know what? I don't remember. I didn't ask her. So those are, and actually, this is really good because I never wrote that down as the when as well too. But for the closing of the interview, thank the person for coming, thank the person for cooperating, because you may need that person again. I'm gonna tell you this right now. When I was working for the city of Portage, like I told you I'm in the business of cultivating information. I only worked for the city of Portage for just over a year, 13, 14 months. But I went down to this one area to take this report. I was doing um, a well, I had this girl that was stealing out of people's garages, and I tracked her down to one specific house. Well, I went to this house and I talked to this girl, and she was pissed off that she had used her address, and it had been an ex-lover of hers. And so when I was speaking to her, it's you can tell that she sort of dabbled in the criminal element from time to time, and that she still did from time to time while her boyfriend was in prison as well too. So while I was talking to her, I wanted to make sure that I could possibly use her later. And so essentially what happened is I made sure she got my phone number, and I said, listen, I want you to call me anytime that you have any problems whatsoever. And she just is like a little bit apprehensive because obviously, probably past interactions with police departments. But lo and behold, probably almost a year after I left Portage, I got a call from her, and she was interested in talking to me about something that took place down the street of her, of this weird guy that was calling, um, that was coming up to her while talking to her, and was focusing on certain areas of her chest. And it made her feel very uncomfortable, was very close to her, and she wanted to report him. And so again, I explained that I wasn't there any longer, but I would take her information, I would get it to a road patrol person, to somebody that I would trust, and have that person call her, which that all worked out well. But this is really, like I say, got somebody that's got really no business and no reason why to talk to the police, other than being able to treat them respectfully and knowing that they have somebody there. And I'm just telling you one story of 100 of where that's happened to me over my career. So the interrogation now, 1 through 6. Oh boy, here we go. So this is where we're going to do our meat and potatoes work. So the Miranda warning, when Miranda does not apply, waiving the rights, the effects of Miranda. Miranda's challenge, question first, or beachheading, found unconstitutional. So let's just dive in first. I put in this slide over here. This is really important. This is what is called your Miranda rights. You're going to have something on your assignment for this. But essentially is that you have to read the Miranda rights in full when you're talking to the person. As I explained before, what has to happen in order for Miranda rights to apply, and that is that the person must be in custody, they must not be free to leave, and you wish to ask them questions. If you don't want to ask them questions, I don't have to read them shit. And this is sort of a game I play with some people that have been in the prison system before. Is like, this is a real common thing, is that like they would say to me, listen, if you had a good enough case, you wouldn't ask me any questions. You wouldn't need to ask me any questions. And so like one of the rapists that I had, when I brought him in, he says to me, you gonna read me my Miranda rights? And I says, I mean, I can, do you want me to? Well, don't you want to ask me questions? And I said, actually, I don't want you to say anything. Well, what does that mean? Well, I don't want you to say anything because if you talk, the rest of these girls get to say what it is that they want to say. Well, that's bullshit. Yeah, I mean, do you want me to read your Miranda rights? And do you want to talk to me? Well, yeah, I want to speak up for myself. Okay, so I do go ahead and read him his Miranda rights, but the idea is that I made him ask for his Miranda rights, and so that's a little bit of a trickery for people that have been in prison before and are schooled, that they specifically know what it is, why it is that you're going to be interviewing them or interrogating them for. So waiver rights, we already talked about this already. It has to be an intelligent and voluntary waiver. Look right down to number 5. It says here, do you understand the rights I have just read to you? You cannot have an ambiguous response of, I think so. That's ambiguous. So either they do it, and you just say to them, ma'am, it's a yes or no question. I need you answer yes, and then they'll try to mess with you and not really answer. Yeah, okay. No, I need to know it's yes or no, because it's your rights. I do not want to mess this up for you. With these rights in mind, do you wish to speak to me now? If I speak to you, will you leave me alone after this? I can, yeah. Okay, I'll speak to you then. So if you see how that is sort of on a contingent, that's not what you want. You don't want it to be not forced, not coercive. You want them to say that yes or no in these areas. If they say that they don't understand them, then you go back and you read them again, and you can read them right with them. They can look at what it is that you're reading for them. I mean, these are all things that occur all the time. But if we talk about the fruit of the poisonous tree early on in some of the chapters, and literally that's what it is that like if you screw this up, all this other stuff that happens after it is down the drain. So it has to happen. Just saying the words they waive their Miranda rights, that ain't gonna cut it. You want to write in there. A huge pet peeve of this is when I was a lieutenant. Is like you're gonna want to put in quotation marks. Yes, you're gonna want to put in quotation marks. They said, yes, I will. Yes, I understand. Whatever it is that they said, you write that in there. The idea of this question first or beachheading. I'm sorry, I wanted to jump back to the effects of, the Miranda challenge. Uh, my lord. When Miranda does not apply. And so essentially what it is that um, Miranda warnings are not required doing any identification processes like fingerprinting, taking voice or handwriting exemplaries, or conducting a lineup or a sobriety test. They are not required during routine booking questions, brief on-the-scene questioning, or during brief investigation questionings like a Terry stop, or the person is temporarily detained. Miranda is also not required during a roadside questioning, like on a routine traffic stop. Um, it's not required by probation officers by the probationer who they're responsible to. And it's also, warning is not required by questioning by a private citizen who is not an agent of the government. So think about George Zimmerman, right? So George Zimmerman, when he was out there, he can go ahead and ask whoever he wants to. You can go and ask whoever you want to. If you work um, at Hot Now and you want to ask your person that works for you if they've been stealing out of the cash drawer or eating cheeseburgers, and because you want to obtain that information for future prosecution, you don't have to read Miranda rights. So that is something that again, something just to be aware of. The effects of Miranda, Miranda challenged. We're going to sort of look into that when we get into our discussion board. I'm sorry, our assignment for tonight, where you have something to listen to, right? It'll come into play for those things. Um, Now we'll get into the question first and beachheading. Essentially what this means, and I'm at the bottom of 206 to the top of 207. I never heard this idea before of what's question first or beachheading. But basically it's when an officer questions a custodial suspect without giving them the Miranda warnings and obtaining incriminating statements from the officer, then gives the warning, gets a waiver, and repeats the interrogation to obtain the same statement. So obviously the statement would be suppressed, but basically what it is that if you haven't heard me now, hear me now. And that is, if the person is not free to leave, not free to leave, I'm not talking about a Terry situation or a traffic stop, they're not free to leave, you better read them Miranda if you want to talk to them. Plain and simple, or everything else is going to get thrown out. The public safety exception and what's New York versus Qualls. So basically, what happened in that specific event, like they had a public safety exception, and the exception in that specific case was there were two police officers, and this is in the 80, were stopped by a young woman who told them she had been raped and gave them a description of a rapist, who she stated had just entered a nearby supermarket and was armed with a gun. The person was Benjamin Quarles. He was located and ordered to stop. When they actually arrested him, he had an empty shoulder holster on him. And because it had to do with the safety of the public, the officers asked him without Miranda, where is the gun at? Because they didn't want somebody else to get a hold of it. And the person ended up saying, Quarles ended up saying that the gun is over there. So the trial court ended up saying, and so did USSC, is that it is totally fine for the safeguards of the public that a quick, expressed questioning can take place, so that way that the public would not get hurt. Now, can you do how long and what did you do with the rape and all that? No, that you have to get Miranda. You have to be able to, it's got to be obviously the same thing as I said, you have to waive Miranda and so forth. But the point being is that what's called expressed questioning, and literally that is what would come of you speaking to that person that quickly, because it falls under the public safety exception. The right to counsel under the Fifth and Sixth Amendment. I mean, this has to do a little bit more with obviously self-incrimination with the Fifth Amendment. The Sixth Amendment is what's called the right to counsel. And so how this attaches is that like, I guess the biggest thing that comes out of this is that, like, if a person's lawyer shows up at the jail and says, hey, I'm here to talk to this person, and you end up saying like, hey, this person is, like, you sandbag it to not get this person to come in there, that falls under Fellers, which basically means is the Fellers case, which basically means is that, like, you cannot do that. If somebody's counsel is there, you have to stop your questioning. You have to go get that person, bring them into the room, supply them, shut all the recording equipment off so that they can have a moment with their counsel. But guarantee you the interview is going to be done, or your interrogation is going to be done. I'm sorry, your interrogation. So the interrogation, right? Selecting the time and place, the ideal conditions exist at the police station. Many opinions on furnishing. We'll talk about that in a minute. So the biggest thing is making sure that you don't have anything sharp in the room. And then also, the other thing is, you can see, you want to make sure that the camera is on the person. So this actually is a pretty decent setup, because right now I would assume that the suspect is the person on the right. Excuse me. And that person there, you can see their body movements. You can also see the officers and make sure that they're not stepping on his toes or harassing the person, or shows a coercive environment. And so this is a good place to sort of set this up at. Obviously, if you're dealing with capital crimes, you need to have it, make sure that it's recorded. You need to make sure that it's recorded not just audio, but also video as well too. So the opinions on the furnishing is that you want to make sure that whenever it is that you're interviewing and interrogating somebody in that room, you better search them first before they get in there. I've actually had people that have brought knives into that room that decided they were going to try to bring knives into that room, or forgot that they had a box cutter on them. And those are all things, obviously, that can hurt you, right? And so those things it has to be patted down. Usually explain it, say, listen, I have to pat you down and search you before you go into this room. It's just our policy. And everybody's going to comply with it. I mean, it's not going to be huge issue. If they don't comply with it, well, Lord to be, guess what? They probably have something on them. The other furnishings that they're talking about may have to be with offering them Coca-Cola or drinks, or you do have to offer them bathroom breaks. You do have to offer them food if it prolongs for a period of time. Sleep if it goes on an extensive time.
So those are some of the things, furnishings that have to do more with keeping it as simple as possible. Now I'm going to explain something to you right here. This guy right here, there's a real big train of thought of not having a barrier between you and this person because you're talking over that barrier. So what I would probably do is I would take this and shove it all the way back in the corner, have this guy sit here so that he was facing it, and have the other two officers sort of facing him so that there's not a huge barrier as the table, because it usually doesn't work out well that way. Anyway, so there's that. Starting an interrogation, show that you were in command. Watch the nonverbal communication. I'm not a huge fan of like showing that you are in command because that just leads to uh, tactics. I mean, you're not going to have somebody sit there and MF you and stuff of that nature. But I mean, literally, I've had that before, and you just ask the person, "Listen, are you done, or do you want to talk about this?" And I've had people, you just leave them in the room. You leave them in the room for an hour and a half, come back. You're watching them the entire time, and just say, "Hey, I'll come back when you want to talk to me." You're not gonna. I don't feel that it's correctly for you to show that you're in command, because literally that is just going to escalate it. I actually don't mind it when people feel like they're in command, because what are they doing? They're talking, right? And that's what I'm in there for. I want to get them to talk. So again, I think that that's a plus. Interrogation, 406, establishing rapport, show that the cooperation is desirable. I'll talk about the slide here in just a minute. But approaches to interrogation, directly or indirectly, forcing responses, we talked about that already. Deflating or inflating the ego and projecting the blame. That is a huge, a very good tactic to use. Rationalizing and combining approaches, minimize or maximizing the crime. That stuff is all really good. Am I going to be able to tell you about all of that um, in just a few minutes here? It all is listed on 210 in your textbook, but I'm literally going to offer this to you: is that the approach that you're going to use into an interrogation is the same approach that you're going to use to try to get your girlfriend or your boyfriend to allow you to buy a new car or the house or something that you really want. You're basically just, I mean, outside of like physical force and kissing the suspect, right? But the point is that literally you're going to use all of your abilities to try to get that person to tell you what it is that you're going to do. And hey, right, do you sometimes inquire indirectly or indirectly with the person that you may be in a relationship with? Do you try to force responses at times? I mean, with an adult, you project blame at times, right? Rationalizing, whatever it may be. Those are all brought in there, and so like, you're not trying to like interrogate your spouse or anything of that nature, but that type of influence, and we're going to see a slide here in just a minute. But those are all areas to work on. Now, I think if you've had me before, I'm going to talk about how I made my money, which is what's called NLP, which is Neuro Linguistics Programming. This is not something that you're going to gain in 1 minute. However, I truly offer, if you would like to learn about this, there's plenty of stuff on YouTube to learn about what's called eye movements and the telling of the truth, the recalling of lies, or recalling the truth, or thinking of lies, if it was on a hearing area, or if it was on something that they tasted, or stuff of that nature. Um, this is literally, again, how I made my money. So I concentrated on eye movements, and I also concentrated on everything to the left that was on here, so that I worked in combining approaches between the two
to essentially tell if somebody was not telling the truth or they were telling the truth, and what is it they were not telling the truth about. Don't have, I mean, I've been through 2 to 3 days courses on this and went to advanced courses on this. I have probably 20 years of experience in using NLP. Still use it today with my victims at times to try to gain, not that I'm interrogating them, but I'm trying to learn about them. And I'm learning while they're talking to me about their eye movements on things that they may not be ready to come off of yet, and how to structure questioning for them so that they do tell what it is that they can remember. So, yeah, so I mean, again, I would offer up, if you're very interested in that, this is a great way to gain information. Is it 100% foolproof? Nope. But at the same time, I've, again, as I say, I've made my money on it. I have that much impressed on me from NLP. The interrogation, 5 of 6. Using persuasion. And so we talked about this a few minutes ago as well too. Make the suspect comfortable, investigative questionnaires. We actually use investigative questionnaires, and it's the first time I've used it, and I'll explain it in just a minute. But these 7 persuasive tools, this is not in your textbook. This is something that I pulled from the internet. I thought it was a good representation. But what you're trying to do is, like, when you get towards direct questioning of the person, like I said, like you're sort of pulling your cards out. You played all your cards, and so like you sort of like really need to like sort of go after the jugular on this. Is that you're trying to get that person to see your side of it, or how the jury will say it. Now, one of the things that I use quite often is that I say to the person, tell me about, like, if you were a juror, how would it be that you would say to this evidence? How could you explain that? Explain it so that a juror would understand that you're not guilty, so that they would explain something, and then I would say, yeah, but it doesn't explain why it was that you were at the party. It doesn't explain why it was that you handed the drink to that girl. It doesn't explain why you make it up from there. So, I mean, that's the point, is like when we get to these type of things, and again, that's why I'm talking about you need to be 3 conversations ahead in 3 different directions depending on the answer, so that it essentially acts as a flow chart. All in all, what I call in a soft hands soft hands approach in getting folks to do what it is and say what it is that they have to say, right? Not that what you want them to say, because you don't want them to tell lies. You want them to tell the truth, but it's to get them to see it your way, or for you to apply what it is that is their nudge to get them to talk about it. Investigative questionnaires, it's actually a pretty interesting concept, not one that I used prior to coming here, and really not one that I'm a huge fan of, but I do say that there's a place for it to get the person to open up. And so investigative questionnaires literally is biographical data, where you talk about like what's your name, what's your social security number, and stuff like that. But sometimes, like when people that have been in prison before, they like to talk about themselves and where they grew up at and who their brothers and sisters were, and all that kind of stuff. So they lay all that out on the line. It sort of brings a ability for you to um, get a rapport with them. And you might be saying, hey, the guy was from, said he was born in Pittsburgh. You know, like, oh yeah, he's a Steelers fan, and then we talk about something that's sort of off topic for just a minute. And it's like, yeah, let me get back to this. Let me get back to this. My boss is making me do this. So we go from there. Um, so again, that is what an investigative questionnaire is. And to me, so the book ends up saying what an investigative questionnaire is. is that they talk about how you submit this information to a company, like 34 questions, and then they come up with this way to make this questionnaire so that an investigator can use it. Never have that, never will probably do it either. Um, I just don't see how, I mean, they're not going to have firsthand experience on how to do this. So, anyways, ethics and the use of deception. Limited officially sanctioned deception, interrogate, and I guess did I write that? Interrogatory deception. Professional behavior remains important. You can read along on 211 as well too, but essentially, the U.S. Supreme Court does allow officers to use deception within a case to gain what's called a truthful response. But if you can't make like your entire um, investigatory interview or interrogation built on lies, that's not permissible. So the idea is that like you can essentially, like of saying like, hey, somebody's seen you at the party, where they're saying, so listen, Marcy is saying that she's seen you at the party, or she's seen you drive away in your car, and that may be a false statement, but it may get the person to say, well, yeah, I actually was in the parking lot. Well, what were you doing in the parking lot? I was just driving through there. So now you at least got the person in the parking lot. So, so that type of thing is permissible. Um, another idea under that is saying that you have evidence that doesn't really exist, or it says making promises, misrepresenting the seriousness of the offense, misrepresenting identity, or using a good cop, bad cop routine. I mean, that's all legal. It is legal. But creating false evidence, like you can tell them that you have a DNA report, but you can't make a DNA report to look like it to get the person to confess. There's a difference between the two. Because you can, I've had it before where people say, yeah, well, your blood was found at the scene of this homicide. Really? Let me see that copy. Because I'm telling you, mine wasn't there. Let me see the copy. And then you're sort of backed in the corner. So you really have to be careful what it is that you notice, because again, if you're the higher the crime goes up for the punishment, the more than likely the more that you're going to have people that are going to be schooled in what you do for a living and how interview and interrogation takes place. Anyway, stay on the legal side. Let's put it this way. The idea is like the one thing that says is that making promises in interrogatory deception may include the claiming to the possession of evidence, as I said, it doesn't resist, and making promises. So you can't make a promise that says, listen, if you tell me, I'm going to make sure that you get 2 years probation. That's illegal to do. What you can say is you can say, if you tell me the truth, I'm going to tell the prosecutor that you told me the truth. And that can go a long way for you in your sentencing. And I will be a person that will say the person did the right thing. And they had known that they did bad and they were repentant of what it is. That's what you're going to get from me. I will put it in the police report. And gosh dang, if you say it, you better put it in there, because that may be why the person, the male or female, may have said what it is that they did. So essentially, it better be in there, because guess what? If you made that promise and you didn't fulfill it, and that's the reason why the person said what it is that they said, what's going to happen to that? Be kicked out. All right, kicked out. Third degree tactics, out the window. Physical force, out the window. mental or psychological abuse out the window. Can't do any of that crap. Don't try it. You'll get caught. Not a good idea. So I'm going to tell you a story where I actually got caught up in something like this. I didn't use any intentionally. I didn't use any physical force, or I didn't use any mental or psychological abuse. But one of the cases that I was working on, my side of the confession got thrown out. And the reason why it did is that I didn't realize. So the person that we were talking to was a murder suspect, and I mean, he ended up going to prison anyways. But essentially, what happened is he was a murder suspect, and while I was talking to him, because he was on suicide watch, I made reference of him not even wanting to continue with the interview with me. If you didn't want to continue with me, then you're gonna have to go back to the boom boom room. That's the padded room. And he was like, oh, I don't want to go back to the boom room. I don't want to go back to the boom room. I'll stay here and talk to you. Well, I didn't really realize, and I didn't know that there was case law on that. I was just explaining to him that he's got to go back to isolation or the boom boom room. Well, there's case law that I'm aware of that says that you can't tell that to people. And so that was a learning experience for me, and luckily we had plenty of other evidence on the person, and he was found guilty. So everything worked out fine, and I learned a lesson, which I'm now telling you so that you don't have to learn the lesson. You learned it from me. Admissions and confessions. What is an admission compared to a confession? Where admission might mean that they had a partial statement, where a confession is a full statement. Partial statement is, yes, I went in and robbed the bank, but I never shot one of the tellers. Yes, I went into the bank and handed the note, but I never showed a gun when it shows right on film that he was having a gun. The idea between this is that it has to be voluntary. So it has to be voluntary. That is going to be the test on if it was um, coercive or not. And so obviously you got to make sure that it was clear and voluntary, right? Okay. So an adoptive admission, and I actually never even knew what the heck this was prior to this class. But essentially, or I knew what it was, but I just wasn't sure what this statement meant. So I'm on the bottom of 213 if you wanted to read here. So essentially what this is saying is that they're saying if to avoid a situation that if two suspects have waived Miranda but only one person has confessed, you're able to bring the two together and ask the confessor to repeat his confession implicating the other suspect. If the non-confessing suspect does not deny the allegations made against him by the suspect who confessed, this can be considered as an adopted admission by the non-confessor. So essentially what happens is that they're saying an adopted admission occurs when someone else makes a statement in a person's presence and under circumstances where it would be logical to expect the person to make a denial if the statement falsely implicated him, but it does not deny the allegations. So again, it didn't say that he denied them. He said that he didn't say anything, that he's not saying that he did it or he didn't do it. That would make it adopted. That it would make it adoptive admission. Um, Sometimes that is known as a tacit admission. That's actually how I know it under TACID. But obviously they changed some of the verbiage since then. Evaluating and corroborating information, breaking a pat story. This is actually pretty good. I didn't not something that I had thought about in a while. So when I reviewed this for the class, we actually talked about it with me and my partner today at the start of the day. So like the more times that you can get somebody to say, okay, tell me again what it is that you said, because that people will try to rehearse a story. And by all means, it's just human nature. They cannot stick to the same story. They'll start adding stuff. And so when you start getting them to add things, that's when it's difficult to repeat the lies and consistent. The story becomes distorted with mistakes and exaggerations, and ask questions that require slightly different answers. So, I mean, I can't give you like an example specifically, but the idea is on this is that to get them to repeat what it is that they're saying numerous times, okay, numerous times, and you're going to find out that they're going to start thinking about it, and the human nature is going to tell them, I need to change this, I can tweak this a little bit more better so that it sounds more truthful. And that's when it is that you sort of get them into a bind, and then that you can show that their story has changed over a period of time. Hey, we're getting near the end here. So, questioning children and juveniles. Considerations. Special considerations definitely exist. As in any interview, the first step is to build rapport, but I have no idea why I would want to give a child a tour of a building, especially if they're a suspect. I mean, I guess if they're maybe a victim or a witness or something like that, to show them that the place is not scary. But if you ever been inside like a detective bureau or a large detective bureau or a police department, there's a lot of f-bombs that are dropped at times. There's laughing and joking. It can be considered a very um, rough environment for kids to be around. So I would just take that. Be careful with that. To definitely announce that you're going to be bringing somebody in. And police stations can be very, scary, especially if they've had a parent that has been in prison or in jail before. The one thing that I want you to remember about this is that you must obtain parental permission. Um, and that has to do with somebody that's even at the school. You've got to get the permission from the parents in order for them to be questioned, because what will end up happening is that they're going to say that you talked to my 13-year-old baby or my 15-year-old baby who's not considered an adult yet, because they're all babies, right, until they get 17, and then they're teenagers, is how it's said by the news, and you definitely don't want to end up on the news. And sometimes having a parent there definitely is beneficial, because some people, some kids, their parent will become, well, you've had to settle them down where they actually won't, um, I can't say this, or they literally say, listen, I'm going to beat the snot out of you if you don't tell this officer what it is that they need to know. But we have it on the other end is that you ain't talking to my son or my daughter, and don't say nothing till the attorney gets there. So those are the two open ends of the question, but you got to play by the rules. So you have to make sure that what it is that you're going to talk to them about, and that you have it online and you're upfront. Don't try to be sneaky about it. So the other things is that, so some of the, as it says, the topics of inquiry may hinder an interview, especially if a person is a child victim of like a sex investigation. We talk about this early on on page 214. But literally, you have to have somebody that is trained in what is like child forensic interviews, to actually do the training, or to do the interviewing. And so that takes special training in order to do that. And you watch, and they're not police officers. You take them to a child advocacy center and you watch through a window or recording equipment on what's going on. You also have a person who has the interviewer has like a little earpiece in them, so if you want to have them ask certain questions about certain things, you can pop that in as well too. But definitely children, you can get third party information to start the investigation, but no child should be interviewed unless it's at a child advocacy center. Okay? Anyways, you can cause great harm towards that child. Do not underrate young people's intelligence or cleverness. Without a doubt. Guess what? Kids lie. I used to lie when I was a kid. You used to lie when you were a kid. There ain't no doubt about it. No kid wants to get their hand caught in the cookie jar. So your don't underrate the intelligence or cleverness. They're watching the shows, Law and Order, Southland. They're watching whatever. They watch The Wire, whatever it may be that's out there. They are very intelligent and very clever. So don't underestimate them while you're talking to them. They essentially get the same rights, Miranda rights, as an adult would. So it's very important that you should have the parent present while you're reading the Miranda. The book doesn't go into that, but you're going to find most policies will end up talking about that. Your departmental policies, a good departmental policy, will say that you should have a parent or guardian present while you're reading Miranda. Now, one thing that I did not talk about that I completely forgot about is the wearing of weapons inside of a room. I am not a fan of wearing a handgun or any type of gun or a knife or anything inside a room because that person sitting across from me could end up using it on me and then the rest of the detective bureau. It's that quick that something can happen, especially if you're the only person with the room. Sometimes the door gets locked behind you. So my feelings is do not interview somebody with a weapon. If they're unarmed, you should be unarmed. So that way your gun does not get used against you. You specifically, if that room is not being audio and video monitored, I didn't say recorded, I was saying being monitored by somebody, it's that quick that your gun could get overpowered and taken from you. If nobody's watching what's going on inside or hearing what's going on inside, it could be catastrophic. So now on to polygraph and voice stress test. Uh, it records several measures. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time with this. So can it be beat? Yep, it can be beat. There's going to be guys that are going to tell you, I'm sorry, that was not very good of me. There's going to be polygraphers that are going to tell you that they're good enough that it can never be beat. I'm telling you that it can be beat. I've seen guys that were not guilty, that were just nervous, and they got false readings on it. I have guys that 3 of the people that I sent to prison for life were pathological liars, and they ended up beating it. They all were found to pass their polygraph, but they all ended up confessing to actually killing these elderly people. So you can read some of the other things that they test on. Again, there's special training that you have to go to school on. That's, I can't even remember how long it is. It's almost like 8 or 9 weeks of schooling that you have to go to. I think that it cost almost $50,000 for you to go to polygraph training. If this is something that you're interested in, I strongly suggest to look towards the federal government for employment because they make a boatload of money, like 6-digit wise. But you do work though too. So if you want to read a little bit more about that, that's going to be in 216, flipping into 217. The use of psychics and profilers. So let's just talk about the profilers before. We have used profilers on some of our serial killers. We had some prostitutes that died. We brought in the FBI DC to actually look at some of our cases of a profiler, which was sort of cool. When we did find the actual killers, not from what it is that they gave us. They were fairly close on what it is that they found. But on prior to all that, we had a very interesting captain that was running our detective bureau, who decided that he was going to bring in you see it right here, psychic monkey. Not that specific psychic monkey, but we had a missing. I'm sorry, it was actually a missing person, and this psychic monkey was going to tell us where this person actually was. I shit you not, I'm telling you the truth. Was going to tell you where this missing person was at. That didn't pan out, but it was quite interesting to bring in a psychic monkey. It's even embarrassing to talk about it, but it is interesting. So the use of psychics in investigations is controversial. I can't remember the lady's name, but she's really popular on TV. When I was working for the tribe, I worked overtime where she came and did a show, right? Did a show she was a psychic, and she talked about things that took place in people's lives and death investigations. Don't really believe in it, but profilers, yes, I do believe in it. The sharing of information, interagency compatibility, obstacles to overcome. That really revolves around one thing, and that is egos. Um, I'm not saying nothing bad about the FBI or the ATF or anything of that nature. I'm just saying is that when the initials show up in town on your event, if you don't have a good rapport with them, um, it can become very abrasive at times. I personally have never had one problem with any type of initial ATF, FBI, border control, nothing of that nature. It was never abrasive, um, because we always had a really good rapport with those agencies. So some sharing efforts, the Department of Justice initiatives, this other stuff here, law enforcement. These are basically like large areas to share information that has to do with um, different partners and different information that's being pulled by investigations. So if there's like a serial killer that's in one part of the country, that they would know about them on the other side of the coast, even just with a click of a finger. Where if you've watched any of the Ted Bundy stuff, that was never around, where they relied on basically newspapers and the media to create that information. And so if you want to read about the data exchange, that crime cog and all that stuff, it's located on 219. It's not anything that I have ever taken a part of. Um, I've worked on basically something called VIACAP, which is violent offenders, and that essentially is another clearinghouse. But again, it's national, on a national level. Pretty sure we're almost done here. I'm going to try to get it at 2 hours. So information versus intelligence. This is what I just pulled out this circle here. Basically, it has to do with information is simply data. Data must have value. Information plus analysis, applying analytical skills. So, what I do like about this is that it actually talks about like the cycle, and the cycle is that like you may get some information like this is how we're going to do this, and we're going to let's talk about what's going on in Portage right now. So they may have some information about these whereabouts of these people. Well, they're going to collect some data on that. They're going to process some of that data, and with that, they're going to conduct an analysis on there, and then they're going to disseminate that back out, and then they're going to relook at this again. If So with that, I mean, I wish I could tell you about something that I know about that case, but literally this cycle took place 3 times to lead them to the whereabouts of where the bodies were located, and it was quite innovative. But I tip my hat to those people working at Portage PD because they did a bang-up job. This is the cycle that they used to locate where those bodies are at. So there's a summary. I got 10 seconds left to talk. You can go ahead and read this yourself. You're going to have 2 assignments with this, and that's it. 1:59:15.